Hello students, in last video we have discussed the definition of population, then we saw examples of population, then we talked about some population attributes which are not found in individual, and then we discussed about age distribution and different age pyramids, and we saw there are three types of age pyramids: cone shaped age pyramid, bell shaped age pyramid, and urn shaped age pyramid. Three types of age pyramid we saw in the last video, and we said that cone shaped age pyramid says that the population is increasing, bell shaped age pyramid says that the population is stable, and urn shaped age pyramid shows that the population is declining. Okay, and today we are going to talk about size of the population. The last paragraph in the population attribute is the size of population, and it is very important with regard to board as well as need. So let's learn the size of population. So size of the population tells many things regarding status of the population in habitat. Size of the population says many things regarding the status of population in habitat. Whatever ecological process we wish to investigate, whether it is competition, whether it is predation, we have to consider them in terms of size of the population. We have to evaluate them in terms of size of the population. Okay, whatever kind of ecological process we want to learn in the ecosystem, like it is competition or it is predation, we have to evaluate them in terms of size of the population. Then and then we can understand the effects of competition, effects of predation. Okay, so whatever ecological process we want to investigate in ecosystem, we have to evaluate them in terms of size of the population. Okay, so we are learning the topic size of population, and we said that size of the population says many things regarding its status in the habitat. Okay, it's the status of the population in habitat, and we said that whatever ecological process we wish to investigate, we have to evaluate them in terms of size of population. Okay, whether we want to investigate predation, whether we want to investigate competition, we have to evaluate them on the basis of size of population. Okay, then and then only we can understand its effect on the population. Okay, so whatever ecological process that we wish to investigate, whether it is competition or predation, we have to consider the size of the population, or we have to evaluate them in terms of size of population. Then the lowest population size can be less than 10. Okay, the smallest population size can be less than 10, and largest population size can be in millions. Okay, so population can be small also, a population can be large also. Okay, a population size can be small also, and a population size can be large also. So the smallest population size will be less than 10, and that is found in the Bharatpur wetland, where Siberian cranes are always present. At least less than 10 Siberian cranes are present in Bharatpur wetlands every year. Okay, at least less than 10 Siberian cranes are found in Bharatpur wetlands every year. So this indicates that there can be a smallest population size also. And the large population size can be millions of chlamydomonas in a pond. In a pond, there can be millions of chlamydomonas also. Okay, so this indicates that a population size can be large also. So two examples of small and large population size are there. The small population size example is less than 10 Siberian cranes in Bharatpur wetland every year. At least less than 10 Siberian cranes will be there every year in Bharatpur wetlands. And population size can be large also, like millions of chlamydomonas which are found in a pond. Okay, and technically the population size is denoted as population density. Technically we have to say that population size is known as population density. Technically population size is known as population density, and it is denoted as S. It is denoted as N. And density is not always measured in terms of numbers. When we want to measure the density, it is not always measured in terms of numbers. Okay, the first point that we said regarding population size is that population size is technically denoted as population density, and population size is denoted as population density. Population size is denoted as population density in bracket n, and population density is not measured always in number, although the total number is the best parameter to indicate population density. This is very important sentence is there. Density is not always measured in number, although the total number is best measure for population density. Okay, population density is not always measured in terms of number, although the total number is the best parameter to indicate the population density. Very important sentence is that population density is not always measured in terms of total number, although the total number is the best parameter to indicate the population density. But sometimes the total number is meaningless to count. So the counting of total number is meaningless, and sometimes it is very difficult to count the total number. Okay, and that's why we do not always measure the population density in terms of number. Okay, sometimes the counting of the number is too difficult, and sometimes the counting of the number is meaningless. That's why we do not always indicate population density in terms of number. Let's see the example of that. Say for example, an area is there which is having a large banyan tree and 200 parthenium plants are growing under that. Okay, say for example, an area is there which is having large banyan tree and 200 parthenium plants are growing under it. Okay, now if we consider the number of the organism, then we will say that density of parthenium is high. Okay, if we consider the number of the organism, then we will say the density of the parthenium is high in that habitat. Okay, but if we consider the biomass, or if we consider the percentage area covered, if we consider the biomass or if we consider the percentage area covered, then we will say that the density of banyan tree is very high in that habitat. Okay, so in this example they have explained that why the total number is meaningless to express the population density. Why total number is meaningless to express population density? If we count the number of the organism, then the density of the parthenium will be very high. But in that case, we are ignoring the large ecological role which is played by the banyan tree in that ecosystem. Okay, when we count the total number and when we say that density of the parthenium is high, in that case we are ignoring the ecological role played by banyan tree in that habitat. Okay, so if we consider the ecological role played by banyan tree, then we will say that its biomass is very high and the percentage area covered by banyan tree is very high, and that's why the density of banyan tree is very high in compared to the parthenium. Okay, so this example explains why the total number is not useful to measure the population density every time. Why total number is not important to measure population density every time. Okay, so here we said that although the total number is very important to measure the population density, but sometimes it is meaningless and sometimes it is too much difficult to count it. Okay, and one example about that is here, that an area is there which is having a large banyan tree and 200 parthenium plants are growing under it. So if we count the number of then we will say that parthenium has high density. But if we consider the biological role or ecological role played by the organism and the biomass which is having inside the organism or the percentage area covered by the organism, then we will say that banyan tree is having large population density, okay, in compared to parthenium. Sure. Then sometimes total number is not useful when size of the population is too huge. When the size of the population is very huge, and at that time the total number is not useful. Okay, or sometimes when size of the population is too large to count, when it is too much difficult to count them, at that time also the total number is not useful. Say for example, a bacteria in petri dish. Can you count the number of bacteria in a petri dish? It would be too much difficult to count all the bacteria in the petri dish. At that time, the total number is not useful. Okay, so total number, counting the total number of the population is not useful when the size of the population is too huge or it is too much difficult to count them. Like example is number of the bacteria in petri dish. We cannot count the number of the bacteria in the petri dish. At that time, we have to consider the biomass produced by that bacteria. Then we can say that its population density will be this much or its population density will be this much. Okay, so total number is not useful when the size of the population is huge or it is too difficult to count the number. Example is bacteria in petri dish. Okay, so sometimes we do not measure absolute population density, but instead of that we measure relative population density. This is another point, is that sometimes we do not measure absolute population density. Instead of that we measure relative population density. How? Say for example, if we go in a river, and if we want to count the number of the fish in that river, if we want to count the number of the fish in that river, so can we count the number of the fish in that river? For that we have to do scuba diving, we have to go underwater, and then we have to count each fish. Okay, so that will be too difficult task. So for that we will not count the absolute density, we will count the relative density. Okay, we will measure the relative density. How can we measure the relative density in terms of fish? We will throw a trap. Okay, and the number of the fish caught in trap will indicate that this much population density of this much fish density is there in this pond. Okay, so to count the number of the fish, we do not count the absolute density of fish. Instead of that, we count the relative density of fish by throwing a trap in the pond and counting the number of the fish caught per trap. Okay, so sometimes absolute population densities are not useful. Instead of that, we will measure relative densities. For example, number of the fish caught per trap. If we want to count the number of the fish in a pond, we do not count them absolutely, we will count them relatively. How can we count them? By throwing a trap and counting the fish which are caught per trap. In that manner we can count the population density of that pond. Okay, sure. And sometimes we count population indirectly, not directly. Okay, sometimes we count the population indirectly without seeing the organism, and without counting the actual number. Okay, this is the last point regarding population size. Sometimes we count the population density without actually seeing the organism. We can count the population density. An example of that is tiger census. We do tiger census without actually seeing the tiger. Okay, can you imagine that? We do tiger census without actually seeing the tiger. So how can we do the tiger census? We can do tiger census by counting the pug marks of the tiger. We can do tiger census by counting the pug marks of the tiger as well as number of the fecal pellets of the tiger. Okay, we will count the number of fecal pellets by tiger and we will count the pug marks of the tiger. On that basis we will count the population density of the tiger. Okay, so this is an example of measure of indirect population density. Okay, indirect population density. This is an example of relative population density. And these two are examples of why the total number is not ideal measure to count the population density. Okay, so in this topic we said that size of the population says a lot regarding status of population in the habitat. Okay, whatever ecological process we wish to investigate in the ecosystem, say for example competition or predation, we have to evaluate them on the basis of population size. And the population size can be small also, population size can be large also. The smallest population size will be less than 10, and that is found in the Bharatpur wetland, and it is of Siberian crane every year. Okay, every year less than 10 Siberian cranes will be there in Bharatpur wetland. And size of the population can be large also. Say for example, millions of Chlamydomonas are found in a pond. Then we said that population size is technically expressed as population density. Okay, the population size is technically called as population density, and it is known as n. And although the total number is the best measure to count the population density, but it is not useful always. Okay, all population total number is not always useful to indicate the population density. Example is, say for example, in an area is there which is having large banyan tree and 200 partheniums are growing under it. So if we count the total number, then we will say that the density of the parthenium is high. But if we consider the biomass and the percentage area covered, then we will say that the density of the banyan tree is very high. And sometimes when the population is too huge and when it is too difficult to count them, at that time also the total number is not useful. And example of it is number of bacteria in the petri dish. We cannot count the number of bacteria in the petri dish. For that we have to consider the biomass. And then we said that sometimes we use relative population density instead of absolute population density. Like if we want to count the number of fish in a pond, we will count the fish which are caught per trap. We will not count each fish in the pond. We will count the number of fish which are caught per trap. So it is known as relative population density. And sometimes we measure population density indirectly without actually seeing the organism. In say for example, tiger census. In tiger census, we do not actually count tiger. We will count the amount of fecal pellet, or we will count the pug marks of the tiger, and on that basis we will count the number of the tiger in the tiger reserve. Okay, so this is all about size of the population, and this topic is over. It is very important topic with regard to board also and NEET also. Please read it carefully. Okay, and if you have any doubt, you can ask. Okay, best of luck.